People first productivity, how CSW is using real-time labor visibility to build stronger 3PL teams. Just some quick housekeeping items first. This session is being recorded. You'll get a email after the event with a link to the recording and the slide deck. So if you have to step away or feel like you missed anything, don't worry. All the participants' microphones will be muted. And if you have any questions for us, please use the built-in Q&A feature. And if we run out of time at the end to answer your question, we will follow up individually after the webinar. So I'm Brian Batchelder. I'm Vice President of Product at Datex, and I'm joined today by Phil Hamrick, who's the co-CEO of Central Storage and Warehouse, and Glenn Lepresti, who's the co-founder and CEO of Takt. And today we're going to go through a story in 4 parts. Glenn's going to handle the first part, the problem, explaining why productivity stalls. And Hill's going to handle the CSW story and a demo of how the technology he's deploying is used in helping them out. And then I'll lead the lessons learned section, and then we'll have a few minutes for Q&A at the end. So I will hand it off to you, Glenn.
Oh, fantastic. Certainly appreciate everyone joining us today. Now, to be clear, I'm not going to be talking about everything that causes productivity to stall here, but in the context of what we're discussing today, I think there are really 4 things that I think we want to talk about and engage in conversation with. And so let's just get right into them. I think right off the get-go, I think a good blanket statement is having a bunch of data and actually using that data effectively are 2 very different things. There's no shortage of data running through these operations, WMS data, payroll data, timekeeping data, automation data, but having access to or having that data and then actually operationalizing that data are 2 very different things. And so the question that we're going to talk about today is, can we take all of that data and all of that information that's flowing through these operations and put it in a form or a format where the actual operations team can understand what's happening? Can they act on it? Can they do something about it to actually drive a change? And that's going to be an important part of the discussion today. Now, before we get into any of that and the data, I think step 1 is having faith in the data. Trust has to come before you can hold anybody accountable or expect them to act on the data. You can have the most sophisticated systems, you can have the most complex engineering labor standards in the world, but if you're going to an employee or a frontline worker and the number doesn't make sense to them or they don't believe that it's accurate, you're probably going to lose the opportunity to have an effective coaching conversation. And as an example, go up to somebody on the front line and say they're 73% efficient. They can argue with that. They may not understand what goes into that calculation. However, if you're able to show them in the context of what's happening, how the operation is doing, how the team's doing, how their peers are doing, it changes the conversation into something more like, what are these folks doing differently? How are they able to do it? And how can we learn from them? Let's see, we're admitting people here. Welcome, everybody. The third thing that we want to talk about is the timing. This is absolutely critical. The information has to arrive in the time when you can actually still do something about it. If you're looking at a report tomorrow, you're certainly not going to affect today. And the idea of winning the shift, winning the day, requires that the data is there in time for you to actually act on it. We've got a customer with one operation, one unique operation in their network that gets data about 6 hours late, and it changes everything about the operation. The staffing decisions have been made, the plans have already been made. I always like to say it does you no good to sit down in front of a computer, log in, and realize that you needed to make some critical change in your operation or have some important conversation 6 hours ago. It just isn't effective. And then finally, the visibility, it really only creates value when people act on it. You can have all the reports in the world, you can have all the dashboards in the world, but that's not really the outcome. That's not the desired goal. The goal is for somebody to actually do something with that. And so Hill's going to talk a lot about coaching and the way that he runs his operation. And so I think it comes down to, can I tell whether I've got a performance issue or whether it's a process problem? And then effectively, can I take the actions or have the coaching conversation that's actually going to ensure that I don't miss today's plan? And so that's really where all of these things come together to address the need to avoid, all of this breaking down. And Hill, that's probably a perfect point to bring you in and let you put some actual operational examples to work here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we are a 3PL warehousing company, similar to people on this call are watching this webinar. And, that just creates a lot of variability. And that's, one of the main reasons why we exist is to operate within that variability and deliver consistent, reliable service. And we have to have operating processes that account for that variability, but that still deliver the end results. And to Glenn's point earlier, like there's a ton of data that gets generated, particularly in our warehouse management system in Datex. Then there's also data that doesn't get generated. There's things that happen in the warehouse that don't get captured. And then to Glenn's point, like what do you do with all that data to drive better outcomes and use it to make decisions and take actions? And historically, we've just really struggled to get the right data that everybody trusts, to Glenn's point, and agrees with, then that we can then use to build our operations off of. And I'm sure people on this call are very familiar with this challenge where you might have one activity that generates task data for one customer, but it's very different than another customer, and you have to have a different standard for those two. You can't expect an employee to operate at the same level of just granular productivity measured by task per hour or something like that for one even within the same activity for one customer versus another. And then you start looking at different activities across the board, and it gets very complex very quickly to have an easy way of being like, yes, this employee is on track, this employee is productive and doing what we need to based off the work that they're being asked to do on a regular basis. And the complexity makes it even more challenging than to deliver the insights back to that employee in particular, but more importantly, back to the leaders who manage that employee, for them to be able to understand and take action on whether things are going well or not. And so, we had spreadsheets, we had, dashboards, we've had all sorts of things that try to show that, but we always just struggled with taking that complexity that's inherent to 3PL operations and then, quickly distilling it down into useful insights for our team members to then use and own their own operations and improvements. And that's where really Takt came in alongside Datex and helped us address this problem. And we were able to partner with both Takt and Datex to build an API that transmits data from our WMS, our existing task data from really from the underlying database into Takt, and then that's generating then this ability to use Takt both to capture that data from Datex, but then also to capture data that's outside of Datex that captures things like indirect task to help paint a better, more realistic, accurate picture of what's going on in our warehouses on a regular basis. And that those two things now allow us to have the right data feeding into this system that then our team members can use. And we really believe that that there's increasing amounts of automation, there's increasing amounts of usage of technology, and at the end of the day, though, there's still a ton of value in getting people to buy into the goal, the vision, the team, and ultimately what we're trying to accomplish, which is serving our customers. And we've had that. We've been lucky to have that organizationally in the past. That's what made our organization successful before I was there, and I think what continues to do that, where we have people who really care, and a lot of that comes down to our frontline leaders and how good they are at articulating the why of what we do every day. That's our work is hard, but it's important because of these reasons. And now like we are, with Takt, we're really able to take data and empower them to do that. And we think that's been a big boost of product. That's a big part of productivity. And I think Glenn mentioned earlier, it's not the only thing that goes into productivity, but ultimately, how willing your people are to make the right decisions on a regular basis, drives a lot of that. And I think that's really what we've been able to harness more data with Takt to do from there. And so with that context, I think my goal is to walk through a few different ways that we started to use Takt. And like I mentioned before, the one of the biggest benefits is it can build a number that people trust. And I think I bet we all have had this before, where you see an employee and you can see from their total scans in a shift or something, and it's just lower than you would expect or lower than average. And I've had this conversation before where I ask them like, hey man, like what happened yesterday? Like why did you only get X number of scans? And they'll be like, oh, I just got hit with the bad orders. Just the orders were not my friend yesterday. I just got hit with the bad orders. And like it's hard to push back on them. You're like, yeah, like you might have gotten hit with bad orders. Like that could be the case. That's very possible. And what Takt really helped us do was account for the bad orders, account for the challenging ones over time. And we were able to like look at a lot of our historical data and then set standards, like I said, based off of customers and different activities that were, that made sense based off, what we see in the past, what employees did. And we routinely update those as well to account for changes in the warehouse or changes in customer requirements. But now that number, like you can't say that anymore. You can't say, oh, I had bad orders, I had more case pick. Like none of that is relevant now because of our ability to dial in like what really is a right metric for efficiency. And then also we add on this idea of utilization. And utilization then accounts for things that don't necessarily show up just in transactional warehouse management system data. And we deliberately assign team members to clean for 15 minutes to start their shift, or work on other projects or help out with inventory control. And a lot of times that data just gets those gaps just got lost in our ability to measure productivity. And we could get a very decent aggregate, it's still labor hours, you still pay for it. So at a very aggregate level, when you're looking at your monthly, either labor costs or productivity or whatever, like all of that downtime factors into it. But it's really hard to then break that down to the individual and be like, yeah, you were really productive. And I know that because when you were working, you were this efficient, but when you weren't working, I stripped that out of your, metric and, can account for the time that you spent helping out with inventory control versus we're just directly moving pallets. And so, that was the main vision with it. And like, I'm not gonna lie, it's not perfect. Like there's still a lot of complexity to it. It still takes a lot of work and understanding from our team to use it properly. And it is, it's game changing though from our team's perspective though. Like we still have a lot of room to grow and improve on it, but it's also made a huge difference already in the year we've done. And one of our things we're most proud of is one of our warehouses, our busier warehouses, in Q1 really had to ramp up its operations, and we kind of increased throughput by about 20%. And so it's really hard to then it's really hard to measure that necessarily. Like our costs aren't going down because we're hiring more people, and then you really want to understand how we're doing on a productivity basis. And so we identified early on, not that this is anything insightful, but that our success is really going to be dictated by our ability to onboard new people, especially on second shift. I think a lot of people can relate. We tend to hire more people on second shift. Our good second shift people tend to move to first shift when spots open up. So it was really like a priority to onboard well on second shift. We equipped our managers with that direction, like gave them time to do that and focus. And Takt really plays a huge role in that. And so what's cool is that I can now look at this aggregate data, and I'm gonna share screen here and show you guys this. And so this is what our one of our Takt views looks like, where I have our Caledonia warehouse and performance. And so, I have a variety of different ways of looking at performance. Performance is really this idea of efficiency and utilization multiplied together. I think utilization, as I mentioned, like is measuring indirect tasks. We've kind of changed the way we've accounted for that over the last 6 months. And so it's a little bit noisy there in terms of how we think about things, but efficiency is really apples to apples. And so, I'm going to select our second shift here and then look at performance in this graph. And so what's really cool is you can see here that this light blue is second shift efficiency and this dark blue is facility efficiency. And so you can really see this clear trend upwards from May and April when we really had this influx of new team members to July and August, and see like the impact of our focus on training and our onboarding from this efficiency. And this is really cool to see and strip it out of like the noise of hiring more people, like costs going up to some extent to start, but then throughput also going up. But now we have this like this is the proof that our focus worked at a high level, and that we're seeing like an overall increase in efficiency. That the full warehouse is benefiting from, and it's really driven by what we're seeing on second shift, where we're able to ramp up new employees and have them drive the overall efficiency up. And so that's a great metric that we love to see at the highest level. And then like how do we get there? Like what are the building blocks to that? Here's an employee whose name is Sam Hardesty, and he started with us back earlier in Q1. And so, we've got this great dashboard that has a bunch of information. But if we look at the similar data for this individual, like you can see a similar trend here. And so, like, he's a great example of somebody we brought in, didn't have necessarily a ton of experience and really needed to learn our processes. But our team, our leaders were able to effectively train him and coach him. And you can see the productivity increase here. That's a little bit noisy here. Like it's not, I wouldn't say every day, like this is perfect information that we can use every day, but the trend line is very clear here. And this is a great like building block from what we've seen to impact the whole warehouse and operation. And it's a great example of what we want to do more of. It's like one of the best things about it is our leaders, no, I got left out, but our leaders really use, this is a different employee, but our leaders really use, this view the most. And this is a shift recap for an individual. And so our supervisors and ops managers for each shift look at this on a regular basis. And so this shows, for this team member, their aggregate total number of scans was like 220. And they're like, that's pretty good. Like that's a little bit above average. The caveat though, is this is one of our 10-hour shift employees. And then as I talked about, like the variability of what a general warehouseman does in a day can really change. And so 220 could be good or it could be really bad. And this gives a lot more context around it. And so the overall efficiency for this team member was 57% for this day. And you can really see it here in this transactional data that there's these big gaps right here that aren't really accounted for. Some of these are breaks, but there's more gaps that they probably got held up or whatever else. And so then this allows our supervisors to see these things, and they look at it in real time. They look at it at the end of their shift and then address it. And one of the things that I love most about Takt is that it really allows for us to do feedback. Oh man, I should have logged in here. I'll get back to that real quick. But it really allows for us to give feedback in a structured way. And so we can click into this observation here, and Takt is really nice. It has insights driven by AI based off the trends here. So you can take the data from just this past day. It gives our supervisors a place to start. Then it has an ability for us to add in our own comments and the supervisors and frontline leaders, at the end of their shift or whenever, to address it with the employee and walk them through like what the data is showing and what they're seeing. And so then what's nice is then that like we have a track record of that. And we think, that one of our biggest things that we are excited about is, ensuring that our frontline leaders were giving good feedback and giving it consistently and routinely. And, we had certain leaders that were really good at that and like did that naturally, than other people who were, newly promoted leaders that didn't come naturally. And, it was a lot of times it was hard to tell for us hard to tell for us like who was really doing that effectively and like what was the data behind it to show it. And now like with that observation feature, we now have a great track record of it. So here's some examples of like what our frontline supervisor who's out on a lift for most of the day is adding in that it really allows them to capture positive things as well. And so I love this one about thanking this team member for catching a mislabeled pallet on an inbound truck and then giving the feedback back to the customer like that. That's something we really preach. And so it, obviously goes a long way. I can't go talk to everybody who does that and tell them great job. So the fact that our frontline supervisor is also aligned on that same messaging and does the same thing, that's really powerful. And that really adds up over time. And then same thing kind of with, our ops manager talking about a new employee, like saying, doing a great job, like getting experience on a lift, early on, excited to see the progress like that makes a huge difference that, like our ops managers articulating, they believe in this person, to in their early days. And that, that we knew that was happening before, but we just didn't have a good way of measuring it. Now we got a great way of understanding how all of our leaders are doing on feedback across their team. We think that's a big reason why productivity is increased. Then similarly, we see things like this that are much more constructive and sometimes critical feedback. But we can document now that this employee didn't receive a mixed lot pallet correctly and didn't follow a proper procedure, or that this one we didn't take a picture the correct way and report back to the inventory control, or in this one we loaded ship pallets not the most efficient way possible. And that these are things that leaders can then go back and revisit with these employees their next coaching session. And then like lastly, I think the other big thing is, in addition to being able to coach and develop our team, like it's also helped our leaders have the confidence to move on from underperformers. It's like you can see this one here that we had a very clear path for a performance improvement plan for an employee, and it makes our frontline supervisors' lives a lot easier when they can just say, "Hey, you didn't hit your numbers here. Like this was the process improvement plan, and like we have to move on." And so we've also found that our higher performing employees have really liked that they see now us holding the same standard across the board for all team members and just building a stronger culture here. So we've again, this has just been a huge impact on how our leaders lead and how we're able to support them, and that ultimately like leads to all this high level data that we're pretty proud of and has really benefited our operations. So with that, I will turn it back over to Brian here.
By the way, you're doing all of our demos from this point forward. That was actually great.
I charge a high commission fee there, Glenn. Just warning you.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Hill. Let me get my slide queued up here. All right, so now we're moving on into the lessons learned section. There are a couple things that I wanted to bring up, and I think it's a through line between the two organizations, between Takt and ourselves. Or we have common outlook on this stuff. One is that just being open by default is a big win, as you'll hear from Hill. It's your data, you should have access to it. There are a few ways that Footprint exposes that data in really easy to consume ways. One is a Parquet data feed, and Parquet is a file format that's really common in analytics platforms. So this is a feed we can turn on and dial in how real time you want it, from as little as 3 minutes behind to 15, 20 minutes every hour. And this is something that Hill and CSW are using. They've baked their own analytics platform and dashboards together. I don't know, Hill, if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, I think that's been a big part in our evolution as a company and how we think about customer service and how we think about operations. And yeah, I think this Parquet feed is really empowering because I think we'll talk more about it. It just gives us control over our own data. And we can add all of our own other sources. We can add Takt data to it. So we have a data warehouse that these Parquet files eventually feed into, but that just liberates us to do whatever we want with it in a variety of fashions. Whether it's just like having Claude ask it a question about customer behavior last week, or building something pretty sophisticated like a labor planning app that's custom to us. But it all starts with this data ability. And I think whether it's the Parquet file coming just straight to us, or the API, the data that's going over API to Takt, like all of it is just the ability to quickly extract and share data out of footprint. That's really powerful.
Thanks for that, Hill. And Hill kind of touched on this. The other big way of getting data in and out of footprint is some stock APIs that we have, or you can go into Datex Studio and build your own APIs. Again, CSW is one of the leading customers that we have that's really embraced Datex Studio. They have a handful of people that are in it quite a bit and have gotten very proficient. And to tease a topic that we'll be talking about more in the near future is we've fully enabled Claude Code and other coding agents to have access to Datex Studio. And again, it's that idea of being open, not trying to sell you our coding agent or embed a coding agent in Studio, but just make it available. So whatever coding agent you're comfortable with, already have a subscription with, etc., is usable. And also, you don't want to marry yourself to one of those things. The leaderboard is shifting weekly or monthly. So again, just that openness kind of wins. And then just this concept of being able to
just one part on that, Brian. Like, I think we do use Studio, and like we are very cautious with it. And I think as we collectively learn how best to leverage AI. I think Glenn kind of brought this up at the beginning, though. It's just like the data is going to win. And what's really nice right now is we can do a lot outside of Datex, but it's all because we're like building on top of footprint and the data that's there. But we can do it, whether it's within like the next gen UI or somewhere else, like it's truly within it. And you can use data. There's a very well, built path with Datex Studio and all of that to do that, or it's just getting that data that's on a 3 to 5 minute real-time basis into something else that's much less risky because it doesn't impact your production database. And so I think that's where we've also found a lot of benefit of trying things out, like very low cost, like spinning up this app that does this very specific purpose, but it's all built on this data. And that's been really nice for us. And we don't have a robust tech team. We're not, paying consultants a bunch of money, but, it's just simply experimenting with this stuff. But it all starts with this piece around, like, you got to have the data. And the more you have access to the data and the data is well positioned, like, then it really unlocks a lot of potential for what we found we can do, even without like having to really think through, okay, if we write this code deployed into, somewhere, even in Datex Studio, that's relatively, well built out, protected, it has could have second and third order consequences. And so we want to be really cautious on that. But if we get the data outside of it, then we can really experiment without, a big risk to everything else.
Yeah, I think you guys are using Retool. Is that correct? Are you using any other external app builders?
Yeah, we use Retool and we use Netlify are the two main ones. And that's, we use Claude Code and have a non-IT person, an operations person who really understands the problem, who's been leading that. And we're trying to hire more people like that, who really understand operations, because the technical piece is, if we're going to get really deep in the technical side, I think that's obviously like where we still want to engage Datex team members, or, a team of like thoughtful engineers. But there's a lot where we don't need that level of, engineering or technical ability. And it's much more just like, we kind of know what the problem is. We know where the data is, and we just got to give, similar to Takt, like frontline users that information. And we're not building out anything nearly as robust or as powerful as Takt, but a lot of it's just kind of organizing that information into clean ways and clean insights and giving it to the right people at the right time, all of which is really doable now, doable in a matter of hours with Claude and different AI tools.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
probably,
so
this is,
okay.
I was going to give you a quick call out here, Brian. I think there's a philosophical battle that's occurring here, right? One is, the data is in my system. You can't have it, or you can have it with a limited capacity. I'm going to sell you my own agents. Those agents are going to be limited to the data that I can see. And I think, Datex is one of the most dynamic organizations that we work with, right? They share the philosophy that it is your data, but it may not be all of your data, and constricting you to the use of that data within our platform, whether it's Datex or Takt, is only going to prevent all of the things that you just said, Hill. Now, in a perfect world, Datex, Takt, we'd be able to build everything that you possibly could want. And at some point in time, we're going to steal your ideas, Hill. Like, when we see it the first time, you're like, oh, that's cool. The second time, you start seeing everybody doing it, and it becomes part of a product roadmap discussion. But there are plenty of situations where it is so bespoke, so custom to the customer, that SaaS platforms, just don't have the ability to solve those problems. And I think that philosophical battle, if I was betting, I think it's your data, you have access to it, and actually have the capacity to do much bigger, much more incredible things by actually not being limited to a single silo, is ultimately going to prove out to have significant advantages.
Yeah, definitely agree with that, Glenn. And just to bring this slide home, so the build on top concept. So like Glenn was talking about, there's just some apps that are hyper specific to a customer that there's no ROI to have us build it. But with Claude Code and the other coding agents now, Hill's able to go in and use Retool, build a custom app that reaches out to several different systems. In the near future now, he'll be able to use the same Claude Code instance to like have Claude build the APIs in Datex Studio for that app to pull from. Like now the ROI is there for that level of effort. And like other systems that he's pulling from just would make no sense for us to make a connector with and integrate with. So I think there's going to be a big renaissance here as more and more organizations embrace Claude Code. And I will say, I'm surprised by how many already are. And just sort of the last thing on that, it's very clear that in the near future, proficiency with those kinds of tools is going to be considered table stakes, just like proficiency with Microsoft Office. All right, this next slide. So a little bit further into the AI and touching on what Glenn said, all these pieces of data that are in silos, there's so much value in unlocking them and fusing it together and having the systems able to talk to each other and use information to make better decisions. Getting into the world of agentic AI and the concept of agents, like Datex sees a future where enterprise software is going to collapse down to this trusted system of record where it's designed for users still, but also definitely for agents to easily use. And the more context that is available to these agents, the better decisions they can make. So we believe in a future where we're very open to any kind of agent accessing the data. We're putting safeguards in place at the platform layer where pretty much every other enterprise vendor, they want to sell you their agents or their foundry, and they're putting all the protections in on the agent side. So you get this issue where, okay, their agent, it's now difficult to get it to talk to other systems. It's locked down to their platform. All those safeguards are for their system and not for any other systems it's talking to. So we think our approach is superior. We're saying, all right, we're just going to make the platform as open as possible, put the safeguards there. We have an option for agents to deploy if you don't already have a system that you're using, or if you have something, it's very easy to plug that in. And then again, just talking about how valuable it is to have data flow in both directions. So the obvious one for Takt and Datex is profitability. You know, Footprint and other WMSs, they have down to the penny, they know what your revenue is because they're the system of record for your billing information and invoices. Takt on the other side, they support that, but it's kind of an estimate. And the other way around, like the WMS Footprint, we have concepts of what the labor costs might be and ways for you to input that. But Takt has that down to the minute. So you start marrying those two together, and now you can see real, very accurate profitability numbers. And because both systems were designed with 3PL in mind, you can slice and dice that data in all the different ways that you would want to. So not just by warehouse, but by owner, project, brand, even the type of task. So we're very, very excited about this and excited about some of the other data that we can start sharing, so that Takt can make more informed decisions like what orders are coming in, what does the dock appointment situation look like, what's going on in the yard, what kind of exceptions is a worker hitting, so that we can feed that in, or different ratings on what kind of tasks are more difficult than others, so that can be taken into account, and the score at the end of the day can be a little more fair. And vice versa. Now we can pull in from Takt information about how long things are estimated to take. So now planning out your day or planning out how to wave orders out together, or what should be prioritized, how long things are going to take. And if you've got like directed work happening, you can know which employee is the most proficient at that kind of task, and that can be included in the directed work decision. So super, super excited about continuing that partnership and expanding the data sharing between the two systems.
I think this is absolutely critical. I mean, if there's a philosophical battle happening on making the platforms, as you said, Brian, as open as possible to the customers, that's sort of the making the data available to the customers. Like, this is the next level where systems are actually comfortable and benefit from talking to each other. I think you all do billing. We get asked if we can do billing on a regular basis. I can tell you down to the penny what you're going to spend on labor, what you did spend on labor, but I have no idea what your carrying costs are, what your lease looks like, and things like that. But the concept of not only making the data available to Hill and the customers, but also looking for those opportunities where intra-system data sharing makes sense, I think opens up just a ton of opportunities that will ultimately benefit Hill and our collective customers.
Yeah, and I think the thing I've brought up now, because it's most relevant to us, is that we just get all this data into one spot in a data warehouse, and then we can do a lot with it. I think the next piece though that's on my mind though is, if my ops manager currently has to operate in like 8 different things, and that's a lot. And they're all great. Like they all do something very useful for that person, but it would be a lot more effective for that person just to have two applications they operate in and that share all the data. So I think, yeah, what Glenn and Brian are saying is that ultimately, we can reduce the amount of different apps or whatever else, but it needs to deliver that same functionality. And so, we're experimenting with a lot. And to Glenn's point, he's, building off ideas, but that's great. Like that's what I want in my partner. Like I would much rather, have I want to shape the roadmap of a Datex, of a Takt to make it more useful for my company. And there are times too when they're just like, yeah, we're not doing that because it doesn't make sense and it's a weird CSW thing. And great, yeah, like that's great feedback. And we've got this like very low cost, easy to build solution that's better than nothing. But yeah, it's nice that we can now really inform the roadmap, and it's much less of a lift for a Takt or a Datex to build out things that we've found ways of putting to use. And it just feels a lot more like a partnership. And I think like, we think a lot about, I think there's like an ultimate like, extreme conclusion of this logic is like, well, why would you even like ever partner with a Datex or a Takt again? And like, why didn't like, CSW thinks they know all these things and has Claude code and knows operations super well. Why don't we just like start from scratch and build it? It's like, no, well, yeah, like that. There, you could do that. Like that's certainly possible. But I think what Brian and Glenn would tell you is like there's really like the value of a system record hasn't gone away. Like it's still there. Like it still has to be there. Like we need that for our customers. We need that for our own operation. We need 100% certainty there. Datex has a track record of decades of doing that. And then Takt like really understands this, labor management challenge and has built a, tool that is really useful to us and a lot of other people, and in a way that becomes even increasingly more useful over time. And so like I think, we understand our customers the best. So if I'm building something specific for my customer, like my team understands that the best. But I think like Glenn and his team really understand, how to leverage software for labor management purposes to impact, productivity out on the front line, floors. And like, we know that to our extent, but not as well as Glenn does. And to me, it still makes sense to partner with a Glenn and Takt and have that like true system of record, built by people with that expertise. Then we can do a lot of stuff on top of it. But really that foundation is a really strong starting point for us to then iterate on from there.
All right. Thanks for that, Hill. Glenn, did you have anything else you wanted to mention before we move on to Q&A?
You think I'm going to stop Hill when he's saying nice stuff about us, Brian? No, no. It was very kind words.
All right, we'll move on to the Q&A section. So Glenn volunteered to be the moderator for that. So Glenn, did you have anything come in?
Yeah, let me take a look here through hold on. All right, published. All right. First question I've got is, I just got two of them here. Number one, not directed to anybody. It said, what did the implementation and integration effort involve? How long did it, this is for you, Hill, obviously. How long did it take to get to where you are now, and any unexpected challenges, roadblocks along the way?
Yeah, like the technical implementation was very quick. Like Brian, do you remember how long it took?
I feel like it just took a couple days, and that's because I was swamped with other things. So yeah, it was very, very easy to create the API for Takt to pull the data from.
And then like for anybody else trying to use that, like there's a starting point. And like I think there might be some different data fields you want to expose different than CSW potentially, but the foundation's there. So it's probably a matter of a day or two of work to get anybody else up and running. Is that accurate?
I mean, so it's now just a configuration screen. And unless there's something you need to do with the data that's not supported out of the box, it's pretty much just clicking a few buttons on a screen. That out of the box integration is benefiting from you being the guinea pig. And I would say, like, as far as issues that we hit, the only thing that I can think of was actually two things: the naming consistency and dealing with composite tasks where there's like a parent task that is bundling a bunch of child tasks and collapsing that so that Takt only sees the one task and not all the child tasks. I if I'm forgetting something, let me know, but I think those were really the only two things we had to deal with.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I was going to say a lot of it comes down to the approach that I know you share with us, Datex, which is configuration, right? It's not customization, right? When you're engaging, even when they were engaging with Datex for the initial implementation, right? You want to eliminate as much of that reliance on either a third party to come in and spend, months and months and months, or writing custom code and things like that. And the configuration pays benefits. Or the configuration approach pays benefits in two ways. A, it gets you up and running quicker, but B, for those folks that have larger networks and want to replicate this out across, multiple operations, it presents the opportunity to forego, significant on-site consulting hours and things like that, because you've made it easy enough where you can be trained on it. We call it train the trainer. I think a lot of folks call it that, but if you've got 40 or 50 operations that you need to roll this out across, the idea of paying a full set of implementation charges and things like that can be minimized, reduced, if not in some cases eliminated by the ease of use, because it's in the platform. And I know that's one of those things that we share with Datex. It pays dividends, particularly with larger networks and operations.
Yeah. So
right. Let me see if
kind
you
of at the
answered
end.
everything. Any unexpected challenges with the last part of that question, Hill? Anything that Hill or Brian, anything that threw a wrench, or I think you guys covered some of those.
Yeah, just a couple data hiccups that are easy to overcome.
Nice. All right. The other question, this one is specifically for you, Hill. In light of what you're saying here, how are your customers' expectations changing, right? Particularly around technology and continuous improvement on your side. What are you seeing from customers, in regard to those expectations?
Yeah, I think in general, like customers are expecting us as their partners to evolve and become, better partners to them down the road. And I think, there's so much technology out there that it's evolving extremely quickly. And I think our partners, express, you know, their confidence in us and belief in us as we talk through them about how we're improving our own operations, how we're finding new ways to add value for them. That's not just storing food product in a warehouse, but ultimately helping them with their business. And then also we'll continue to do that. So I think it's been a great sign to our customers of our evolution and our commitment to improving ourselves as an organization and become ultimately a better partner to them. And I think that really resonates with them as well.
Nice. All right, we got three more questions here. Let's see. What tools in place help with forecasting of future labor? Can we evaluate orders for the upcoming week and determine the number of people based on labor standards to create shift plans? This is probably a two-part question. From the Takt side, yes, we actually rolled out about 3 months ago the next iteration of labor planning, which does everything that you're talking about. You set your plans for a month, a week, a year, and then ultimately you decide how much of your historical and AI-based assumptions you want that labor plan to leverage. There's bring your own plan. I know everything. I know exactly how much is going out the door or in the door. We can then break it down by department, or if you have that level, you can break it down. But ultimately, having the right number of people in the right places is critical. And it goes back to something that we talked about at the very beginning, and that is real-time data, because you can create a labor plan. What we do is convert that into daily goals, right? And those daily goals can adjust based on what you know or what we know historically. But the second piece of that is what we call intraday labor moves. And that is, let's tell you where you can see I'm overstaffed here, I'm understaffed here, I need to move 6 people, I need to move them now. And you even get into, don't just randomly ask for 6 hands. There are people that we know are skilled at a different level of proficiency in the department that's in need. And so you're able to actually see suggestions for, here's 12 people I would consider making the move with. They're going to net the best results. Happy to follow up. You can reach out to any of us, but we could do a whole discussion on labor planning. The next question: can you, Hill, view performance by pick types, B2B pallet pick, B2B case pick versus B2C case pick?
Yes, that is one of the best parts about it, is like it's very easy to set that up and have different standards for all of those.
Yep. That is all in the configuration. You can get as granular as you want. That goes back to what Hill was saying earlier in his analogy or his example of somebody saying, well, I got all the tough orders. You decide at what level you want to set different expectations, what credit people want to get for a B2B pallet pick versus a B2C case pick. And it gets normalized. So you get to avoid those conversations where folks say like, well, I just got all the pallet picks today. Yeah, absolutely. And then last question we've got here. I appreciate the section on system openness. Is there a base Datex integration to Takt, or does this need to be customized? Do you have to be on next gen?
Yeah, so we touched on that a little bit. There's definitely a base or stock integration that is easy to deploy and configure. It's designed to be extensible, and then of course, if there's anything that it's not covering that you would need to cover, we can just go a level deeper into Datex Studio and customize it there. As far as next gen, you wouldn't need to be on next gen, but you would need to be on a version of Footprint that's compatible with next gen, so we can stand that API layer up and run it. But that would be the only condition there.
Great. Great. That is all of the question we've got so far. Unless there are any others, I'll turn it over to you, Brian.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for attending. Thanks for the great questions. Thank you, Hill and Glenn, for spending your time with us and saying great things. We all say great things about each other. It's always good to be win-win-win. If anyone has any questions, you can reach out to any of us. We'll be sure to put the contact info, like email addresses, in the email that'll go out after this webinar is done. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you, guys.
Great. Thanks to all of you as well.